All right, we're ready to go.
Okay, well, hello, everybody. We're starting tonight on slide 240. We've been introducing the Mars calendar, and we've, on the last slide, we've looked at the Mars ages, we've looked at the Mars cycle, the 9 phases, including how the rebirth, adult and rebirth, is really good because it actually goes backwards in the retrograde motion. And then we've looked at the long ages of Mars, how the period is so close to 3 exact sacred rounds that you don't have to intercalate the extra 13 days or skip the extra 13 days more than once every few centuries. And so now we're noting that at opposition, on slide 40, we noted that at opposition, when Mars is actually biggest and brightest, that's not one of the phases. That's actually in the middle of the, oh, I just thought of something. That's in the middle of the adult phase, which is interesting because usually people are seeking after riches in the adult phase and want to be big and bright. And that's where Mars is. I've never thought of that before. It's biggest and brightest before it repents. That's interesting. And then it repents later on and is born again and becomes more humble. I might actually add that to verbiage somewhere. In any case, that phase used to be called prime and now it's called rebirth. So I think in order to see that was why I just reviewed these slides, because that usually I don't review that much. Okay, go to slide 241. This shows how in the uniform versions that Venus and Mars are forever locked in a 4:3 ratio. The uniform Venus calendar has 585 days in each cycle, always. The uniform never has intercalation. It does not actually follow the planet. The uniform Mars has 780, which is very close to the true, but not exactly. So these two really are like gears that are at a ratio of 4:3. Again, to me, this is strong evidence of a creator, because all the planets, Venus is also exactly 5 sets of Mercury, exactly. And so anyway, let's go to slide 242. An example of these ratios, the Mars to Venus of 4:3 and Venus to Mercury of 5:1, is in the life of Jesus Christ. From the time of baby Jesus' return from Egypt, which we saw back on slide 101, through the resurrection, is exactly 15 Mars cycles. Ratio 4:3 makes it 20 Venus cycles. And that's 100 Mercs. 5 times 20 is 100 Mercs, which is the uniform size. But it's also exactly 101 Mercury cycles. This is of the true cycle of the planet, which is a little shorter than a Merc. This is exactly the same period. I say this at the bottom of the slide. We've seen this interval before in the life of John the Baptist. That interval is exactly how long John the Baptist lived. And I think I called it the Baptist interval in honor of him. And but yes, and I say that a Merc is that. But when you look at all of these that line up, they're not only that many days, they're not on random days. both ends of this period are on holy days on 6 different calendars. And that's only 6 that we've already looked at. It's resurrection to resurrection on Mars, so it's an exact interval on Mars, and it's an exact interval on uniform Mars. Remember, Mars doesn't change very often. So it's from quickening to quickening of the uniform, resurrection to resurrection. And on the uniform Venus, it's one Lord to one Lord. These are all in red. These are major holy days. And one Lord on the Mercury. We've already seen the resurrection was on one Lord on Mercury for the Savior. He's also born on one Lord, and he's baptized on one Lord, or he's actually baptized on 0 Lord. But they kind of, it's a pair of holy days together. And now, what about the symbolism on the sacred round? One dragon. Now, that's not a very good day. That's when evil enters somebody's life. Well, what is this a record of? This is a record of when he had to go to Egypt to get away from evil. And so anyway, this has to do with getting away from evil. And then the resurrection's on temple. So anyway, again, we see all of these lining up. We see the intervals actually being used in the 4:3 ratio. And we could see it many times, but I thought one example would be enough, I believe. The one reason for the one dragon is the trip to Egypt was exactly one evening star life from one birth to one death on the sacred round of about 9 months. So one birth Venus to one death Venus is an entire sacred round. So they left on the trip on when Herod was going to kill him on the day one dragon, and they came back on the day one dragon. So that's one sacred round. So it had really more to do. The one dragon had more to do when they left on the trip, getting out to save his life. Now, there's another way to look at this whole trip. Leaving the womb of Egypt. Egypt is kind of like a womb. Israel had to go down to live in Egypt for 300 years. They often say 400, but it's really 300. It's exactly
Glenn, you need to move to the next slide.
And it's like a gestation period. And then they broke through the water on the crossing the Red Sea, and the nation of Israel was born at the Exodus. And they're born on Jesus's birthday. So Egypt really was like a womb, and it's darkness. Egypt represents darkness, black. Its name in anyway. That's enough. Leaving the womb of Egypt is kind of like a birth. And see, it was one birth on Venus, and that's like a birth. You're leaving the womb. And hence, it is a kind of a life interval, like John the Baptist, from leaving the womb to resurrection. So, just like we've talked about, there's several starting points for the birth of the earth, when they took the fruit, when they were judged, when they left the garden. There's different starting places of a life. We've already seen that the day that Jesus went to the temple and was blessed was like a birthday at age 40 days as a baby. That was like his birth on the uniform Enoch calendar. This is like his birth on the Venus calendar. Anyway, there's just lots of this symbolism where there's born a few times, and then the death is a few times. There's the death when he actually dies, and his resurrection is also kind of counted like an end of life, right? Just as it is here. So it's the resurrection, not death. Anyway, lots of symbolism. Okay, that's probably more than we needed. Number 244. Okay, Jacob, the man Israel, entered Egypt. Yeah, this is what I was just saying. he entered Egypt, the womb, on this day, which was first fruits on the uh, perpetual Hebrew calendar, and Israel was born 300 years later at the Exodus. The Annunciation to Mary of Jesus was also on first fruits. Oh, yes, this is important. I'm glad I got a slide on this. It's almost exactly 300 days from when the Annunciation to Mary happened to when Jesus is born. So Jesus is basically in the womb 300 days, and Israel was in the womb 300 years. And Jesus, or Jehovah really, said to Jacob, he said, I will sojourn with you. And I believe this is one of the meanings of that phrase, that the life of Jesus parallels in days what happened to Israel in years. For example, the 40 years later, Jesus is born, and 40 days later, he goes to the temple. Israel is born at the Exodus, and it takes 40 years for them to enter the promised land. So there's not only 300 years, there's 40 years that follow. I've tried to extend that more, and I've not been very successful, but I believe it's not just a coincidence. When there's 2 or 3 witnesses, it makes it look planned to me. Okay, let's go to slide 245. All right, Adam died at the age of 930 years from when of mortal life, from when he left the Garden of Eden at beginning of mortality. And that day was at the end of Tabernacles. Now, that's great. He's born on Tabernacles, which represents birth on the Hebrew calendar when you get your tabernacle. And he dies on end Tabernacles, which is one of the death dates on the Hebrew calendar. It's when you lose your tabernacle. So, I mean, Adam's birth and death, this is the first time I think we've talked about his death. He dies in the day 0 Lord, both on Mars and Mercury. And I think I waited till now to talk about his death date because it's important on Mars too. 0 creation on Venus, atonement on the Enoch calendar, and resurrection on the uniform Mercury, and 13 grass, which is kind of a pre-resurrection date. I don't totally understand grass, but it's a step just before resurrection, and probably the spirit. Well, I won't say I don't know what it is exactly, and I don't understand the process of resurrection exactly either. That may be a 2-part process.
Why does the slide show 999?
Life on sacred calendars. Look at all of these cycles. I'm going to look down at the bottom first. From tabernacles to end tabernacles, we just discussed on the Hebrew calendar. That's a few days more than an exact cycle, 6 days more, but it's very significant. On the uniform, it's tabernacles to tabernacles. On the priest calendar, it's from one chief to one chief. And if you look up above where I've got the word priest, first of all, in years from birth all the way to death, he's 999 years. He lived almost 1,000 years. And he was told that within the day thereof of the Lord, he would surely die. The priest calendar, it's on one chief. That's the first day of the priest cycle. I believe he had the priesthood assumed on the day of his creation. That one chief is because he's a patriarch from that day. Whether he's ordained or born, I don't know. But there wasn't a day of his life, I believe, that he was not a priest of the patriarchal kind. And then on this day, the fall is on that same day, and then the day of his death is on that same day. Oh no, excuse me, just to the fall. From birth to death, then is on the same day on the Mars cycle, both from one Lord to zero Lord. And then on the Venus, it's one creation from entering mortality to death. So you see on this one, there's 3 different start places: birth, fall, and mortality. And they all end at death. So that's another example of 3 start dates and cycles to show that they're basically equally important. And yeah, so this just shows how the Mars goes right along with the Venus as another witness. Okay, let's go to 246. Now we're going to look at Abraham's father. He isn't mentioned much, and he always gets the bad rap. Well, he's an idolater, and this and that, which is true. But remember, the whole Abraham's really different for him to figure out that the whole culture is wrong. That's unusual. Nobody's born on a bad day. Nobody said Sarah had to do what he did. And so his birthday is amazing and matches right in with Abraham. Abraham's father is born on this date, which was the end of Passover, a major holy day in Hebrew. But he's born on the same day as his son on 3 different calendars. One birth on both Mars, and one birth, that's the day that represents birth, on both Mars and uniform Venus. See, those 2 are linked together again. But they're only linked during the age in which Abraham's born, because remember, those ages don't last forever. So they're linked in that age, both on one birth, and then on one temple, which is also the day representing birth on the sacred round. So it's not only a triple father-son link, but all 3 days represent birth. That might be the only one in history of a father-son all on 3 days, all of which represent birth. That's really rare. I haven't figured out the odds in these things, but that's incredibly rare. Okay, slide 247. Hebrews are named for, I believe, not all scholars are going to agree with this, but Hebrews are named for Abraham's ancestor, Eber. He's a really good guy. Denver has some knowledge, and he never mentions Eber. He always says, well, everybody between Shem and Abraham were cut out. Shem and Eber had an academy, and Jacob went to live with Eber for 14 years, according to the book of Jasher, in order to learn the ways of the Lord. He was getting away from his brother Esau, and kept wanting to kill him. So that's why he wasn't taught it. He wasn't homeschooled, if you will, by his father. But anyway, he's born on a certain day, which is atonement, one creation, one resurrection. I'm just putting him in because he deserves some credit. He may not be in the patriarchal line. And I don't know that he's in the Melchizedek priesthood line either, of the high priest of Melchizedek. But he's not an idolater. He's not a bad guy. He was an amazing man. And I cheer for him. Okay, next slide. 248. It's Eber's son who is Peleg. Now, Eber, I don't think I show his death date anywhere in here, so I'll just tell you, he lived 430 years after he begot Peleg. So he lives like 460 years. That's still a long time. This is after the flood. Shem lived 600. Eber is going to live 460 something. Peleg means division, and he's only going to live like 230 years. And he had a brother named Joktan. And Peleg means division, but Joktan means something like shortened. And Peleg is named Peleg because in his days the earth was divided. But Joktan is in his days, man's life, the length of man's life was shortened. So they're both cut in half. 230 sounds like a long time to us. But the life was cut in half in that generation. And after that, Abraham's only 175, Jacob's 180. I mean, Isaac's 180, and Jacob's 147. You can draw a graph of the ages, and it looks like an exponential decaying curve. It looks like something in the earth changed after the flood, and men just started dying. Okay, that's when Peleg's born. He's also on an amazing date: atonement, resurrection, and those two are the same as his father. So again, father son link on two different days on the same calendar, and also one birth on Venus. So there you go, one birth on Venus. And I told you it was 430 years until Eber's death. After his birth, Eber dies on one birth Venus. We've talked before that 430 years is a Venus cycle, and that's how we got the age of Jacob. He was, from his birth to the Exodus was 430 years. So another Venus cycle here. So it's one birth, one rebirth on Mars, and one flower. And it turns out the confusion of languages at the Tower of Babel is right at the end of Peleg's life. I may not have published an exact date for that. I've got one. It's not too amazing, and I'm not too sure of it. I'm not sure that's even on my list of dates. But it's at the end of his life, so it's about 230 years after he's born. And I gave that date. He's born in 2240 BC. I think he lived 240 years. And so it's right about 2000 BC that you have Tower of Babel. Anyway, that's when the earth, now Jasher says it was divided into many countries. It doesn't talk about continents drifting apart. It says that before that, all the people were of one language. They all lived together. They're all part of Nimrod was like the world emperor, and that had to stop. He's the one that built the tower. And by the way, Abraham is living in 2000 BC. He's 50 years old at that time. And he hasn't come out and started his ministry yet, but he's going to. He gets married at about that time. And right around then, he's going to leave this area and go. Everybody goes off to found their own nations after this. And that's right when Abraham is led to the promised land and he founds Israel. So Jasher says it's mostly about that. I have no doubt that continents also split apart because that's told in other scriptures. Oh, this does say when Eber died. I didn't know I included that. So it's on the day one skull, perfect day for death. It's one birth which completes the cycle. It's on trumpets. It's on resurrection, UV. Okay, he lived 464 years. So yeah, it was 34 plus. And his son lived only 239. I thought it was about 240. So, oh, here, I forgot I had a slide on this. I should, go to the next slide, by the way. Go to 249. I'm sorry. I might not have said that. So we're on 249, and I've already covered most of that. There's another picture of the Tower of Babel. And I've been talking about Eber's death, which is mentioned at the top on day one skull and one birth. And I already mentioned what's at the bottom. He had another son named Joktan or Joktan in English, Joktan. He was made little. That was it. That's what that means. Because during his days, the lives were shortened, according to Jasher. So I just try to include a few people here that aren't mentioned much in elsewhere. So let's go to slide 250. Now we're going to look at other things on the Mars calendar to show how it's used. Isaac is born. Now we've already seen Isaac had important days on other calendars, but he's born on one Lord on the uniform Mars. Rebecca, his wife, was on resurrection on uniform Mars. And his brother Ishmael was born on one rebirth uniform Mars. So those are all rare holidays. All the holidays on Mars are only once every 2 years. So there you've got a man and his wife, or prophet and his wife, and brother, all on rare holidays. None of them are on birth, which makes that would be a lot harder, but still they're on holidays on the uniform Mars calendar. Let's go to slide 250. Well, let's see what we're going to do. I think we're going to stop on this one on 251. We'll do 251. Jacob was born on one translation on Mars, as were his sons Dan and Gad. Now we already looked at his sons. Those three are also born on one birth. All of them. Mars. See, Mars is 3 sacred rounds. So if they're the same on the Mars calendar near at the same time, they're going to be the same day on the sacred round, because a Mars cycle is always exactly, well, unless you're in the transition time, it's 3 sacred rounds. So in a way, it's not surprising, but in another way, all 3 were born on the day 1 temple on the sacred round. Now it's also 1 translation on Mars. His son Simeon was born on 1 creation and died on 1 quickening of Mars. And the picture I show there is him blessing his son, which is not what I have, but I didn't have any other picture, I think. So we will stop on that slide, 251, and continue there next time. It is now time for questions. And one question I see Russell is one of our attendants tonight, and he's the one that asked a question about, on the Hebrew calendar. I'm going to modify his question a little bit, but it has to do with new moons on Sabbath days. First, I guess I'll answer his question, and then I'll explain more and why I wanted to do it to the group and not just to him. So the law of Moses definitely says that new moons are Sabbath days. That doesn't mean they're weekly Sabbath days. The moon can be new any time. They're holy days. Their word Sabbath day is what I call holy day. So in my work, the first day of every month, and new moon means first day of month. It's usually actually the first day on which a new crescent moon was seen, and it's seen in the evening after sunset, and so it's usually the next day is the first day of the lunar month. On the actual, that's the observational calendar. On the what I call perpetual Hebrew calendar, the first day also has to be on certain days of the week, and so sometimes it'll skip a day. In any case, whatever day is the first day of a month is a holy day. And that's what it means by the Sabbath day. And so that's just, those are some of the minor holy days. A lot of people have read that, and I've just seen many people with this question. and belief, and that is they read that and say, oh, the original Sabbath days, the weekly Sabbath is on the new moon. And so every month you find out when the new moon is, and then 7 days later is the Sabbath, which is the first quarter, and then 7 days later at full moon it's another Sabbath, and 7 days later is another Sabbath, and the true Sabbath is on a lunar Sabbath, and it's not every 7 days, it's seven days for a month, and then it restarts new the next month. That's a total misunderstanding of the law of Moses, and I believe I can convince you of that very quickly by pointing out when Moses was first taught about the Sabbath day, it was even before they were given the 10 Commandments to keep the Sabbath day holy. Do you remember? Think about what you know about how the Sabbath day started. And it probably was around for Abraham, but there's no record of anything before Moses in the Bible of Sabbath, of a weekly Sabbath day. What happens is it's when the manna started to fall. And it was a really big deal. It fell for, I won't review the whole thing, but briefly, for 6 days it falls. It never fell on the seventh day. On the sixth day, Friday, you got a double portion. If you tried to keep a double portion on any other day, it would rot. On the Fridays, you could keep a double portion and have food on Saturday without having to work. Saturday was the Sabbath day, the seventh day. It had nothing to do with the moon. That happened for 40 years. That's amazing. I believe that happened. I believe the books of Moses are true, as there may be a few mistakes of men that crept in, but that's not one of them. There's not invented interpolation stories. I believe. I have no evidence for that at all. And I have evidence of amazing mathematical integrity and self-consistency. So the Sabbath kept by Moses was every seventh day, every Saturday. Had nothing to do with the new moon, but new moons were holy days too. And rabbis debated for years, in fact, have two different sects over when Pentecost, when first fruits is supposed to be, because it's to be held 7 weeks after a Sabbath day, and they don't know that Sabbath day is always on a Sunday, or it's the day after the Sabbath day. There's something that happened on a day after the Sabbath. Anyway, I'm saying rabbis argue over where there's certain the word Sabbath means the weekly Sabbath or a holy day. I'm just showing you that for many cases they're interchangeable. So the Pharisees hold first fruits on any day of the week, and the Sadducees hold it always on a Sunday, the day after the Sabbath. And in my work, it's very clear that the Sadducees were correct. It should always be on the day after the weekly Hebrew Sabbath, which we call Sunday, or the Lord's Day. Okay, so that's my answer to his question. Now, I do have the app up, and I am going to look at Mr. Chat Box. Okay, here we go. Question says, why does slide 245 show 999 years and Adam was 930 years? So from the birth to the fall was 69 years. Yes, I think it's actually, he lives just over 999 years. I think it's 69 and a half years if you get it down to the half year. Well, I've got the dates. The dates are all on, I think. You can just look at how many years. Short answer to your question is yes. Oh, not birth to fall. No. Birth to mortal, the second question. From his birth, or when he first breathes, as I call it, to mortality, that's the 69 years. The 930 is measured from mortality, not from the fall. That's important. Mortality is not at the fall. Don't ask me why. They eat the fruit. I don't know if they ingested something bad. I don't know if it's symbolic. I don't know what happened, but I do know that his life is counted from the day they left the Garden of Eden. And that's when mortality starts. And remember, the whole creation fell. The bunnies didn't eat the fruit. Everything fell on the Passover day when they left the garden. So that's the 69 years. This is also a Hebrew tradition. It not only comes from Joseph Smith, who said that Adam lived nearly 1,000 years, but it comes from the Hebrews, and it was something about those. They knew it was 70 years in the garden, and they talked about, it's something to do with David, who lived 70 years. There's something about one of them gave the other ones. They have the point is it's a Hebrew tradition, which I don't remember the details of. Okay, so that's the answer. Any other questions? We've got a few minutes. Well, you're thinking of more questions. I'm going to think of one too. I will tell you a report on what's coming out. In fact, it's actually, don't look at it yet. I have posted today a new article that is basically the one I promised last week. And I said there would be a new one on the star calendar. I made it sound more amazing than I think it is. There was something I didn't quite understand, so I won't say this is earth-shaking. And I'm not going to even send an email out to anybody on it for a few days because it's still lacking some pictures and graphics. The words are mostly there. So I always wait a few days to read my article. But the star calendar, I'll just tell you the results. And you maybe don't have to read it at all. The problem I was solving was the star calendar. We've talked about precession. Well, we haven't. There's something called precession of the equinoxes, where the star that rises in spring changes slowly by 1 degree every 72 years. It takes 26,000 years to go around. That's called precession of the equinoxes. There's a star calendar that follows stars, and there's the Enoch calendar that follows the seasons, and they differ by about 1 degree every 72 years. I had separate models for the two of them. Oh, I know why I'm telling you, because I told you last week. I actually told you the words. I don't usually share what I call revelations that I get that help me, because I can't figure this stuff out by myself. But last week I told you that I heard, when I really prayed and was stuck, I just heard 3 words. Enoch governs all, I think was the 3 words. That was the idea. That's a huge hint. I had been counting the star calendar separately from the Enoch, so they were just all over the place. One year, this star rose with the sun, and another year, another one a whole week away rose with the sun, and the next year it would jump back to the first. It was just a massive confusion. God's house is not a massive confusion. It is extremely orderly. When I followed that clue, which I've done this week, I used the Enoch calendar to decide when you put in the extra 7-day leap years. You do that according to the Enoch calendar. And I changed the star dates exactly the same as the Enoch calendar. Why? Because after all, they only differ by 1 degree every 70 years. But you can't, and 1 degree is like 1 day. You can't change the Enoch calendar or the star calendar by 1 day. When you interpolate intercalate, you have to put in a whole week of days. That means the same star doesn't reign for just 70 years. It's 7 times 70 years, about 490 or 500 years. So a cool calendar would have the same star for 500 years. That means you can use the Enoch intercalation for 500 years and use the same star, and that's how it is now. In the new version that'll be coming out soon, in 500-year periods, you have the same star. And then after 52 weeks, each one is a week. Anyway, 52 of those periods, it gives you the 26,000-year cycle. So there you go. 500 times 52 is 26,000. So the point is, that's the solution. And what's nice is that means in our age, for 500-year period, the star that rises with the sun, which is sort of the one that rules over in this age for 500 years, it is the same, and it's always on the spring equinox on the Enoch calendar, not the real spring equinox. The spring equinox on the Hebrew calendar, which jumps around by almost 2 weeks on our calendar, it's always the same star. I just think that's super cool. And you always know where the stars are. And I was happy to see that it turned out that my wall calendar is correct. And all the stars are in their correct position on that calendar, which I was pretty sure of, but I didn't know the way I know now. So we still have about 4 minutes from when we started. Are there any other questions? That was just sort of a news flash of what's happening. Well, I have another question on a whole different, let's see if I do or not. No, I think I'm not going to go there. One of you, Glenn, you always have questions. Why don't you come up with a question?
Well, I actually have an unrelated question, except for maybe being able to talk in Grand Junction. Are you going to the conference, John?
Yes.
Okay, so you will be there. Do you have any, are you going to be speaking? I haven't pulled up the calendar.
No, I have not been asked to do anything. I'm just going to listen.
Okay.
I will probably get cornered one evening, mercilessly. No, I'm happy to share stuff. If you see me there and have questions, ask me things, but I don't have a breakout session or I don't have anything official at the conference, but I'm happy to share with people. I'm also happy to leave this alone and just have fun at the conference and socialize. I don't have to talk about stars, so whatever works.
Okay, and we have a few minutes left, but from all of your studies with the Book of Enoch, and since we're kind of ending on that topic, what is your view why it is not currently now in the canon? Why didn't Joseph Smith include it in the canon? And on your website, is that the best translation of Enoch, the Book of Enoch, that you found?
Yes, the one on my website is the best translation. It's also the first, but I've read 3 other translations. Well, I'm prejudiced toward astronomy. I will consult the other translations on other topics, but the astronomy is perfect and to me understandable. Anyway, short answer is yes, I like that translation best. And it's not copyrighted, so that's great. As far as why it didn't get included in the canon, it was in the canon right after the book of Job, in the version they took to Ethiopia when they scattered after persecution and stuff. And actually, I think they went to Alexandria, but it's in Ethiopic. The reason I understand that it was taken out is there were 2 books that had weird things in it, like talking about 4 angels on the 4 corners of the earth. that was too weird because they, at that time, had figured out the earth is round, did not have four corners, so they were embarrassed about that. They didn't know that it refers to four stars in the sky, etc. And they decided to take out either, the other weird book was the book of Revelation. And they just took a vote and Revelation stayed in. So Revelation could have been taken out because just look at all the weird stuff in Revelation. That, you know, and they didn't like that. Anyway, that's how it got voted out as I understand it. Jesus quoted from the book of Enoch more than any other book as far as I can tell, 128 times according to one of the translators, R.H. Charles, which unibly quoted, by the way. Somebody is asking, isn't part of the book of Enoch included the book of Moses? No. The book of Enoch is, Joseph Smith in the book of Moses was given an inspired through modern revelation account of a lot of things in Enoch's life, which does not match up at all. There's a book called The Book of Enoch, which I bought at Deseret Bookstore, and they sold it. I haven't been there recently, but they used to sell it. It's certainly available online. And the Lawrence translation, Archbishop Richard Lawrence, I believe his name is, 1840 translation. I actually recommended to the Scripture Committee to be included, but I was a lone voice, and they said, we're just swamped. And also, I said, there's 2 or 3 books in the Apocrypha that ought to be included, that are definitely inspired. And Joseph Smith didn't have to retranslate them, but he was told that some of them are definitely great and should be read and studied. Anyway, they just had so much to do that got voted down mostly because of the swamp, how swamped they were. But you know what? I'm going to say something that I was trying to say earlier, and it just came to me how to say it. There are 2 books that I have testified of that all, as far as I can tell, I'm alone. All other scholars have said they're fraud. They call it pseudepigrapha, false writings, meaning that's not written by who it says. They don't believe, scholars don't believe that Enoch wrote the book of Enoch. I have been testifying of that since the very day of the Twin Towers falling. My article on Enoch came out the morning of Twin Towers in Meridian magazine. And I've been testifying of another book, the book of Jasher. And I have that on my line. I believe that soon I will write an article testifying of another book of dubious origin that I'll probably be a lone guy on that one too. And I'll just tell you, when I pray about things, the answer is I'm supposed to testify of things that I know about and witness. I'm a witness. People ask me, who are you? And my answer is I'm a witness of things. And you may or may not believe the witness, but anyway, the work I get involved in is much more than calendars and things. And anyway, the time is up now from when we started, so I will stop there. But yes, Book of Jasher. Oh, and Book of Jasher is not scripture and never claimed to be scripture. The Book of Jasher is like the large plates of Nephi. The small plates have the religious stuff, and the books of Moses and the Bible has the religious stuff. The Book of Jasher is more like a record of kings, people's birth dates, death dates, what wars were going on. It's not filled with inspirational stories. It's a history. And so I would never include Jasher in scripture because that's not what it's intended to be. Nevertheless, it's true, and it's a great source. It's just not scripture. It's not from God. It's from men writing down what happened, I believe. With all that in mind, let's tune out and we'll start on slide 251 next, or 252 next time. So we'll go from there.
All right, sounds good. Well, we'll conclude. We'll get this uploaded, of course, to John's YouTube site and then also to Restoration Archives. So thanks everyone for joining. We'll talk to you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.